So one of the other dominant discourses that you talk about in your book is the idea of the charismatic teacher, and one particularly that comes from TV and movies and films. And I think when people think about a good teacher, they often think back to their own education experience and a good teacher that they had when they were at school. So tell us a little bit about that particular discourse.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, we often look back and, you know, we remember a teacher who has, so to speak, touched us in some way. The very fact that we remember them, I think, is significant. What do we remember them for is another matter. But I think this idea of the charismatic teacher, which it is very popular in film and television depictions of teachers, and we are, I think, encouraged to side with or to identify with such a teacher or feel some kind of sympathy or empathy with them. Often these teachers are people who are not just charismatic. I mean, being charismatic, of course, they just have to come into the classroom, and they don't need so much to be well prepared. They don't need to be drafting detailed lesson plans and so on and so forth. They just need to come into the classroom and somehow infect the class with their own enthusiasm. I suppose one of the classic film is the Michelle Pfeiffer film, Dangerous Minds. And Michelle Pfeiffer plays this. It's based on a true story, actually, although I don't know how much it's changed in translation. But the Michelle Pfeiffer character comes in to a class of students from a very deprived background, sort of underachievers, people who are being written off. And miraculously, she turns them round and they all start doing very well in mathematics and so on. And she connects with them. Her skill is that she knows karate, for example. So she comes in and, you know, the fact that she knows karate is one way in which she can then form a relationship with the children who think, oh yeah, you know, she's not just one of them, she's one of us too. There are various other ways in which she tries to identify with the students, and they identify with her, and they all do well through this identification. And I think one of the things we learn from these films is that there is a kind of enthusiasm or interest in generally in public perception of teachers for such a kind of teacher. That there is a recognition that teaching isn't just about developing certain skills, competencies, techniques, strategies, and so on. That something else is required. But I also think these depictions can be quite dangerous and unhelpful. I mean, for one thing, I think they play into a certain discourse, if I can say that again, in which schools and teachers are ultimately, responsible for everything to do with education. So we often hear, politicians saying, "Oh, it's you can't." Just because someone comes from a poor background, that's no excuse for them not succeeding in school. Which is all very well, but I think we all know as teachers that the person's social economic background does impact very much on what they do in school, and we can only do as much as we can as teachers in schools. Of course, we try hard, to make sure that everybody achieves well, but we do recognise that there are issues in society that we alone cannot solve, cannot sort out. And I think it's it's an easy sort of cop-out for politicians who then don't have to worry about changing the system. When you hear, for example, saying, somebody from a poor background has as much right to go to Oxbridge as someone from a wealthy background, my immediate response is, well, why do we have poor people? Why do we have this situation? Why do we tolerate in this country, having people who are very poor? And today I'm reading today about how the gap between rich and poor is widening, continuing to widen. So I think there is a problem that that this discourse kind of supports an idea that anything that's wrong in society can be sorted out, you know, if you just have the right kind of sort of charismatic, and these charismatic teachers are also often depicted as sort of saviour teachers. You know, they come along and they rescue deprived children, you know, and everyone sort of starts crying with joy, you know, to see these children from poor backgrounds. And you kind of forget, perhaps, in all of this, that you know, there are plenty of, you know, poor people to cry about instead. So yeah, we can learn things, but I think the other problem is that you know, you talked about remembering teachers, you know, from our own school days, and we all do. I mean, I do the same as other people. The good, what for me, ones which what teachers I thought were good and teachers I thought were not good. I think the problem, though, is that, especially perhaps for beginning teachers who are learning to become teachers, is that it's seldom a good idea to try and emulate, you know, good teachers that you remember, or to try and emulate them, because, you know, we are all different, and it doesn't really work. And again, so again, you'll get a situation in which a student teacher tries to become the teacher that they remember, and it doesn't work. You know, or they try and be Michelle Pfeiffer, and it doesn't work, because life isn't, you know, real life isn't like movie life. You know, it's not. People don't just do what they're supposed to do. You know, kids will continue to you know, to misbehave or to think that they are no good, that they're never going to be clever. So I think this idea of the sort of charismatic teacher who might come in and just, you know, manage to, you know, rescue people, in the end is quite an unhelpful one. Although on the plus side, it does kind of remind us that there is more to teaching than just skills. Rather than charisma, I always encourage students to think more about developing their communication skills. You know, that and to just to show students that they are understanding, that they treat them fairly, and not to try and be this kind of charismatic figure who comes in. And really goes back to this idea of focusing on your teaching and the learning that's taking place. You know, I think at the end of every day and every week, every term, the questions we should be asking ourselves are not how did I do, how was I, but what do I think of my students learning? How, you know, am I happy? Do I think they're learning as I want them to be learning? If not, what might I do about it? And the charismatic discourse, I think it does place too much emphasis again on the who am I, you know, what am I, and it can, you know, and it encourages a sort of introversion, which I think is not very helpful. Too much emphasis on one's own performance rather than on, you know, what the job actually is about.